So as Rachel said, I've been freelancing for about 10 years for all kinds of outlets. I'm also an assigning editor at an online publication called Narratively, so I kind of get to see it from the other side too and see what's working and not working when people send in pitches. And we're just going to talk a little bit. I'm going to talk pretty generally, some best practices, do's and don'ts, some specifics about pitching different kinds of stories, and kind of how to build credibility over time as a freelancer. And then I left plenty of time at the end for questions. So, whatever you have been trying to figure out how to do in freelancing, we can talk about at the end. But first, can I just see a show of hands of how many people have done that kind of freelancing before, like editorial mainstream stuff? Cool, okay, and then how many are hoping to get your very first byline ever? Okay, cool, just want to get a sense of where we're at. So I want to talk about, before you even pitch, preparation is really key, and I think easy to skip over. Once you get excited and you get yourself all pumped up and you have the confidence, you're ready to send an idea, you kind of want to just send it out immediately. But a lot of the work happens before that. And one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you is to just keep a running list of publications that you really want to write for. So you have your specific goal publications and not just generally like, I want to write for somewhere. Because if you have your list of places you want to write, you can really follow them, get to know them, get a sense of what the different sections are, what kinds of pieces they run, how long are their pieces, do they do a lot of like opinion-driven stuff, or is it all reporting? Do they publish personal essays at all? Do they run long reported features, or is everything like 800 words? And knowing all of that will help you avoid sending a personal essay to an outlet that only does investigative journalism, or sending a reported pitch for somewhere that only does personal essays. That's, the biggest no-no is to let the editor know right away that you have no idea what they do or what they're interested in. Right? So I personally am a big fan of spreadsheets, and I have a really neurotically organized spreadsheet of all the different publications that I have in my sites that I really want to write for, and their sections and what kinds of pieces they do, and the editors for those sections when I can ferret that information out. Which brings me to the next thing, which is to keep track of specific editors and their interests as well. Because remember, you're pitching to people. It's easy to think of these publications as these big, scary monoliths, but really it's just a human being at a computer on the other end, and a lot of it is subjective and down to that editor's personal taste. So if you can get to know the editors a little bit, you can target it to like, hey, I know you happen to be really interested in, badass women from history, or whatever small niche thing that editor happens to be interested in. And a great way to do that is Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, use it. It's been the single greatest resource in my freelancing career by far. I follow tons of editors and follow other freelancers, and you get to know them as humans and get to know their quirks. And a lot of editors will put out call for pitches on Twitter, and they'll also talk about things that they hate when freelancers do, so you can make sure to not do those things. And if you're not super familiar with Twitter, it's pretty easy to just search Washington Post plus editor in the search bar, and then filter it to people, and then you'll see a whole list of people who are Washington Post editors who say that in their bio, and you can follow them. Or searching the hashtag call for pitches or hashtag freelancer or whatever, and just curate yourself a list of people who you want to keep tabs on and be in communication with. And interacting with them there so then they recognize your name when you email them is also a really great way to get a little bit of a foot in the door, so at least you're not a complete stranger. So that's kind of before you even get to the idea, right? But then when you find your topic and you know what you want to write about, a lot of research needs to go into that too. Researching what else is out there on that topic in general. So you're think of it like a conversation, and if you're writing about a topic, you're in conversation with every writer who has already written about that topic. And when you walk up and you want to join a conversation, right, if a bunch of people are standing in a circle and talking to each other, you don't just walk in and blurt out what you have to say, right? You stand there for a minute, listen to what everybody else is saying, get a sense of what's been covered, where everybody stands, and then see if you can add something constructive. I think of writing for public consumption as very similar to that. You're in conversation with other writers, and a big misstep is people not doing that step of seeing what is already out there and putting an idea out there where it's like, yeah, we already covered that, and now we're doing the responses to that, and so you seem kind of out of the loop if you don't know where the conversation is at yet, right? So know where the conversation is in general, and also know if the specific publication you're pitching has covered that topic before. If you pitch somebody something and they're like, yeah, we just ran a piece almost exactly like that a week ago, you're not gonna look like you're doing your homework, right? So just do a quick search on the website, see if they've covered it. And if you can say, hey, I loved this piece you did last month on this topic, I have a different take, thought this could supplement your coverage, then you really get a gold star for knowing what you're talking about, right? As for the actual pitch, there's a lot of, this is one of those things where it's like people always ask like, why can't somebody just tell me exactly how to write a good pitch? But it's not because people are being gatekeepers and keeping secrets, it's really because everybody has a different answer for you. But I'm gonna tell you just, the approach that I use, what I've heard from other editors who I work for, writers who are really successful, who I ask like, hey, how did you pitch that? And I have enough, a good enough relationship with a few of my writer friends that I ask them that when they land a big feature somewhere, and I'm like, that story is amazing. Who did you pitch? How did you pitch it? And you don't want to walk up and just ask people you don't really know that. It's going to seem like you're, not really happy for them. You just want to get something out of it. But once you have that community, sharing resources like that can be a really great way to keep up with your skills. Big thing, though, that's pretty universal is to keep it simple and short. I think the most successful pitches tend to be like under 250 words, max. For a really short and sweet piece, you can do it in 2 sentences a lot of times. Of course, if it's a big reported feature with a lot of sources and a lot of backstory and stuff, obviously you're going to need more than 2 sentences. But if you want to write an op-ed or a personal essay that's pretty straightforward and the whole piece is only going to be 800 words, like don't send an 800-word pitch, right? It should be just a couple sentences, enough to give the editor an idea right off the bat, like this sounds cool, I want to know more, or like this is off base, I'm not interested, right? Address the editor by name, which again goes back to researching who the editors are. You can find them on Twitter, you can sometimes find them on the masthead, or sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging. And some bigger publications seem to kind of keep that information buried on purpose, but you can usually find it on the masthead, sometimes just Googling like how to pitch Glamour magazine. It's like will actually be fruitful. A lot of editors put out guides online with like all of their personal loves and hates and pet peeves and wish lists and stuff. So I would definitely suggest that really pretty rudimentary Google search when you want to pitch a publication. You might find like really great resources. The features editor, Guardian US, for example, does that. I was trying to figure out who even is the right person to pitch for this section and was getting desperate, and I just searched how to pitch to the Guardian, and this editor has a Medium page where she has like long wish lists of topics she wants to see pitches about. I was like, oh, okay. Well, there you go. Perfect, right? And a note on addressing people by name, just use first names. It's a pretty casual industry. When I get emails to like, dear Miss Dancyger, I'm always like, oh, who is that? Who are you talking to? It just feels a little stiff and like, you can be casual, colloquial, to a point. Don't say like, hey, check this out. Right? A little bit professional, but just pleasant, calm, hey, Lily, I'm writing to pitch you this idea, right? Like you're just having a conversation with a human, right? So, hi, so-and-so, first name, really simple pitch, 2 sentences if you can do it, maybe a paragraph max, and then a short bio. And by short, I mean like, again, 1 or 2 sentences, who you are. If you've published in any publications, mention that. If you haven't, don't mention it. Don't say like, this will be my very first publication. You don't need to draw attention to that, but if there's any relevant clips, and you're all writing in another area, so you can say, I'm a copywriter with X years of experience, or if you have specific expertise in the subject matter you're writing about, mention that too. And then if you have them, link to a couple of published clips. Don't link to your whole portfolio. Don't send 10 links. But if there's 1 or 2 pieces that are relevant to what you're pitching, include those links. And then a note about simultaneous submissions. This is a hotly debated topic in freelancing as well. Most editors want you to only be pitching them. Send it to one person at a time, wait for them to respond, or to not respond for long enough that it's a de facto rejection, which happens a lot, so prepare for that. It's not personal. That means it can take a really long time to get a piece sold. You know, if you pitch to an editor, you wait a week, you follow up, you still don't hear back, you wait another week, you send it to somebody else. You know, if you're doing that 5 times before you land a piece, it can take months before you publish a piece. So that's one reason to have a lot of ideas going at once, so you're not losing your mind just refreshing for this one piece, but kind of have a flow going, so you're like have a lot of things happening. And that also means there are exceptions to the simultaneous submission rule. If you're pitching something that's time sensitive, and it's actually time sensitive because of the news cycle, not just because you're really eager, right? That's a mistake people make. They're like, this is time sensitive because I really want to see it published, but really it's evergreen and could go out anytime. But if you're pitching something that's actually pegged to the news cycle, it's a response to a movie that's coming out this week or something that's happening in the news, and it's really not going to be relevant anymore in a week, then you can say, first of all, put time sensitive in the subject line, because editors get so many emails that it might take them weeks to get to it, but if you say, like, this is time sensitive and they know right away to look at it, that's okay. And that also means you can send it to several people at once, but you have to tell them. I always, at the end of the pitch, if I'm doing that, I say, due to the timeliness of the subject, this is a simultaneous submission. You know, thank you for your time. That way they know that they're in competition with other editors. Because as an editor, it's really frustrating. You know, I've had this happen before where I get a piece in my inbox, I read it, I love it, I wait a few days to take it to the editorial meeting, I talk about it to all my colleagues, I have one of them read it, I wait for them to get back to me, we all talk about it again, we finally agree that we love it, and then I email the writer and they're like, oh, sorry, I sold it somewhere else. I'm like, okay, thanks, so glad I just spent so much time like advocating for your piece, right? So don't put editors in that position, because then they're going to be wary to want to work with you again, because you essentially just wasted their time. And unfortunately, in this scenario, the editor's time is worth more than the writer's. And that's just true, even if it's not fair. And then after the pitch, was one of the biggest questions I get about freelancing is about following up. Because everybody always is like, did the editor get my email? Are they going to respond to me? The first thing I'll say, 90% of the time, yes, they got your email, and you don't need to follow up 10 times. It's okay to follow up. Eventually, you know, editors do get swamped, things do get lost, they do forget, but wait a week if it's not time sensitive. When somebody follows up with me the next day, it just makes me not want to answer them, and I intentionally put it at the bottom of the list just because I'm a little spiteful, and I know I'm not the only one, right? So wait a week. If it's really time sensitive, again, you can follow up in like 3 days. And when you follow up, it doesn't have to, don't send a whole new email, just reply to the thread. Say, hi, I'm just checking in, wondering if you're interested in this. If they're still not responding after the second follow-up, you can say, if I don't hear back from you by X date, I'm going to send this elsewhere. And sometimes that is the little kick that they need to actually answer you. But don't email them over and over again. Eventually, if they're not responding, that counts as a no. I wish that all editors always responded with actual rejections, but unfortunately they don't. Okay, so those are a few best practices. After the acceptance, when the editor accepts, that's the time to negotiate your rate, and you should try. You know, if they say, this sounds great, 800 words, $150, there's nothing wrong with saying, any chance you could do 200, right? But that's the time to do it, not when you file, not when you're invoicing, right? That's the moment to negotiate. And make sure they give you a contract. There's a lot of shady business going on with publications folding and not paying writers, and sometimes you have to chase payment. Sometimes there's a dispute over whether you're allowed to reuse the work or only they are, or whatever. So that's also the moment to make sure you get a contract. And I know this part of it is something that people get so sheepish about, but it's fine. It's business. You're selling them a service. They want your service. It's okay to say, you know, how much you're going to pay me what rights am I retaining for this? Can I have that in writing? It's not rude or unusual. It's perfectly fine to advocate for yourself, right? But make sure you're doing it then, because if you wait until they already have the piece, then you have a lot less leverage to make sure that they're going to pay you on time. They're going to give you a clear outline of the rights you're retaining and all of that. So then it gets a little more complicated when you start talking about the different kinds of pieces, because there are kind of different rules for pitching different kinds of stories. You wouldn't pitch an op-ed exactly the same way you would pitch a big reported feature, right? So personal essays are kind of seen as like an entry point a lot of times, which I personally have a lot of opinions about and don't think that should be the entry point, because personal essays are really hard to write well, and it ends up being kind of exploitative. A lot of young writers end up selling a lot of really personal stories before they really have the skills to tell them well, and then all their dirt is out there on the internet forever. So, be mindful of that. Don't feel like you have to sell every traumatic or personal or embarrassing thing that happened to you. That's a trap that a lot of writers fall into when they're trying to break into freelancing, because for whatever reason, personal essays are kind of the easiest foot to get in the door. So with that disclaimer, that's a good place to start if you want to start publishing. Partly, I think, because there are less, you don't have to prove yourself as a reporter. You just have to demonstrate that you can tell a good story. There's less external skill necessary. It's more about just you as a person and you as a writer. And also because personal essays are usually sold on submission rather than pitch, so you would actually write the whole thing and send it. There are exceptions to that. There are some places that will take pitches for personal essays, but because so much of it is about the writing and the voice, the execution, it's kind of hard to say, to describe it in a couple sentences and demonstrate that it's actually going to be done well. There's a personal essay about, your parent dying can be really beautiful and poignant, or it can be boring and kind of self-indulgent. It can go either way. So write the piece, and then the same thing, to say, "Dear so-and-so, I'm attaching for your consideration my 850-word essay about the time I traveled alone in Spain for 6 months when I was 18. Thank you. Here you go." Right? Still need to describe what it is. You have to say enough to make the editor want to actually open the document, but you don't have to send a whole long pitch because you're attaching the thing, right? So if you don't have clips yet, that's a good place to start. If you have a couple clips and you want to start getting into bigger outlets, the kind of next step up is op-eds, which also have kind of morphed into hot takes now, which again, it's easy to make a fool of yourself doing, so be mindful. Remember that what you're saying is going to be out there forever, and the trap with that kind of writing is that kind of the more provocative your opinion is, the easier it is to sell. But you have to balance that against the fact that that provocative opinion is then going to be searchable on Google with your name forever, so make sure it's something you actually believe and you're not just arguing it for the sake of getting a clip. But editors are always looking to fill those kind of quick turnaround short piece slots when something big is happening in the news. Everybody's arguing about it. Recently I think there were 1,000 hot takes a day about R. Kelly, right? Whatever the big news is, if you have an opinion about it, somebody probably wants to buy it. But that's also a double-edged sword, right? Is that everybody's writing so many opinion pieces. That's the point where it's really important to pay attention to the conversation and see kind of what's the first gut reaction that everybody's going to have, and you're probably going to see some of those flooding the first day news breaks, where it's this is kind of the first and obvious thing that needs to be said about this, right? And unless you're really quick and you have an inside track with an editor and you can call them up an hour after news breaks and get the assignment, you're probably not going to write that first take, right? You have to then think of, what's the element of this that people are missing? What's the surprising part? What's the unexpected thing? What's the perspective that I can bring to this that nobody else can? What is everybody overlooking? What do I disagree with about that first take that everybody is now nodding along with and saying, yeah, and accepting that as the truth? Can you turn that on its head somehow, subvert it, complicate it, come at it sideways? That's where your bread and butter is going to be with op-eds. And it's hard, you have to train yourself to start thinking that quickly. It's usually we're used to consuming news, and when things are happening, we're trying to get the information, we're trying to learn about it, and getting into the mindset of not just consuming it, but immediately digesting it into a perspective that quickly is hard. It's something I can fall out of practice with really easily, and it's hard to get back into it. But then once you're into it, it becomes the way that you read the news, and you're generating ideas about it. So just practice, maybe even before you start sending pitches, just spend a week or two when you read the news in the morning, try and think of what do I have something to say about here? And just start making notes and thinking about it in that way. And then once you practice a little bit and develop some ideas that you're like, this, I'm actually onto something. The world needs to know, right? Then you start sending those. And with that, formula is similar. Hi, editor, I'm writing to pitch an op-ed about blah, blah. 2 sentences. Say, this is what, I want to write an op-ed about how people are missing this side of this argument. And then you give one or 2 sentences where you back up your point and you explain how you're going to argue it and how why you're right, basically. And then who you are in a couple clips. And that's it. And these are so quick moving that editors will usually respond pretty quickly. Even at pretty big outlets, I think the Washington Post and New York Times op-ed editors, they probably get hundreds and hundreds of pitches a day, right? But they both usually reject me within an hour, right? So it's at least you get the no, and you can move on to somewhere else, right? And then once in a while, they'll be like, actually, yeah, that's a good idea. Turn it around to me in 3 hours, and then you go, oh shit, now I have to actually write this, right? But that's the whole other element. So then reported features, that's usually the end goal, right? When people want to freelance, they want to do these big stories. They want to uncover something new and do a deep dive into an issue and report and, be out there telling stories. But reporting big stories like that is also kind of a catch-22 or a chicken and the egg. You have to have clips of that kind of piece in order to get assignments for that kind of piece. So it's tricky. But the way around that is to have some really good clips of personal essays and op-eds at big reputable publications, and then start incorporating a little bit of reporting into your personal essays or into your op-eds if you want to get to there. If you just want to write lots of op-eds forever and get really good at it, that's awesome too. But if reporting is your goal, you have to kind of think about the long game and build up to it and be thinking about that from the beginning and start incorporating research into your op-eds, or reported personal essays are pretty big right now, and they're great. So what that means is, you're telling a personal story, and you also interview a couple other people who have had similar experiences. So you're not just telling your story, you're talking about this experience in a kind of more universal way. Or you interview a doctor or an expert or whoever, some kind of professional. And that's a good kind of sideways way to demonstrate that you can do that kind of work. And then once you have a few clips with that, assigning editors who are looking at reported pieces will kind of trust you a little more to do that, right? And that's, the biggest thing really, I think, that people forget with freelancing is that it's a long game. If you just want to get one published piece, you can do that. It's trial and error. You'll figure it out. You'll get there, right? But if you actually want to build a career in freelancing, or at least a side gig in freelancing where you're doing that kind of regularly and building credibility and a name for yourself, you have to think of each piece as building on itself and what it's going to get you, right? So first, if you've never published anything, first just try and publish something, right? Start small, start accomplishable goals. But once you have a couple pieces, it's about always pushing yourself and trying to get to the bigger, better thing, right? So bigger, more ambitious pieces, and then once you have some clips that you're really proud of, looking for the bigger outlets, the reputable outlets. It's unfortunate, but it really is very insidery when editors are looking at your pitch. If you've published in big outlets that they recognize, they're more likely to give you the assignment because that demonstrates that you can, play with the big kids, whatever the term is there, But sometimes it just takes one really good idea to get your first Washington Post op-ed, your first Rolling Stone review, whatever it is. And once you have one of those, it can build on itself pretty easily, as long as you continue to push yourself and really be ambitious and think about the whole picture, not just one piece, but think about what door is this piece going to open for me, and where do I want to get to? If you have your long-term goal publication, what are the clips that an editor at that publication is likely to respond to, right? And then make that your goal. And what are the clips that the editors of those publications are likely to respond to? And really think about what you're building up to. That's something I was not doing in the beginning. I was just like, I just want to publish. And that was my whole goal, right? And I did, but it took a little while to realize that it's not about getting a byline, it's about my brand as a freelancer, my credibility with editors, my my portfolio that can demonstrate to an editor that I'm capable of whatever it is that I'm pitching them. That's really what it is. You're asking them to take a risk on you. You're saying, not just I have this idea, but I have this idea and I promise I can execute it well. Right? And you have to give them a reason to trust that that's true. And then I asked, so speaking of Twitter, right, which I use all the time for this kind of thing, I asked in preparation for this, for some of the freelancers that I follow, hey, if you were going to give advice to yourself as a new freelancer, what would your advice be? And a couple of the biggest things that came up, I'll share with you. First was, there's going to be a lot of rejection and a lot of silence. Don't be dissuaded. Use the feedback that editors give you, if they do. If they reject and they say, thanks, but this is a little late in the news cycle for this, remember that and think, okay, I have to be faster next time. Or, thanks, but we covered this recently. That's a reminder, oh, right, I forgot to research what they had done recently and see, and use that. But also, some editors are not going to give you feedback. Sometimes they're just going to say, no thanks. But that is also still a win, because they at least are responding to you. And if they have 500 pitches to get through that day, they at least are acknowledging, you sent me an idea, it doesn't work, but you are a person, I am a person, we can communicate with each other, which should be bare minimum, but so many pitches get ignored that really, when you get a response, it's a win. Oh yeah, this one I said, but this came up too, so it's worth reiterating, that it can take a really long time to land a pitch, and it can be disheartening, but that's a good reason to have a lot of plates in the air, I have an example of this. There was a story I really wanted to cover. There was a conference in Toronto. It was a feminist porn conference, and I was like, what is that? I'm fascinated by this story. Somebody's going to let me write about this, right? And I pitched a bunch of places. I got a bunch of rejections and a bunch of silence. I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to go to Toronto. I'm going to go to this conference, and I'm going to find a story there. And I paid my own way, airfare, conference admission, hotel room. I was and I was 23 at the time. I didn't have money for this kind of thing, but I was like, somebody is going to take this story. This is too good. And I went and I found I talked to a bunch of people, found a bunch of cool subjects, a bunch of cool stories. I went back to New York and I was like, all right, got it. And I sent a bunch of pitches and I got 15 more rejections. Nobody wanted this story. I was like, what? I didn't know why. And so I put it away for a little while. I worked on some other stuff. And then I came back to it and I was like, I'm still in the hole for that hotel room. I'm going to keep pitching this story. And it took, in the end, it was over a year since I first started pitching and over 20 rejections. But I ended up getting a feature in The Guardian, a Q&A at New York Magazine, and another Q&A at Cosmo out of this. Just because, right? Thank you. Right? But that's the example I use where it would have been really easy at several stages in that process to give up and to think that it was a bad idea. And sometimes you do have bad ideas. I've also had lots of stories where I pitch it and I get a rejection. I'm like, yeah, you know what, you're right. That's kind of, never mind, I'll do something else. Right? But with that one, I believed in it. I knew it was there's something interesting here. Somebody is going to let me write about it. And you just have to keep pitching, right? And that's another thing that my spreadsheet comes in really handy for, right? When I have an idea, I immediately put as many outlets as I can think of that I could pitch it to, and I put them in order of like most desirable to like, if nobody else takes it, I'll publish it there, right? And that makes it easier when I get a rejection to just immediately send it to the next thing. Sometimes I tweak the pitch a little bit, but that's my kind of rule for myself, is that I have to pitch it somewhere else the same day I get the rejection, rather than wallowing and letting it kind of flounder. Just like the minute you get that email, say, okay, thank you for considering it, send it to somebody else. And having that list there ahead of time so I don't have to go back and research over and over again, it makes it harder to get discouraged and just like keep it going. So just a reminder that it's a grind. It's exhausting and often discouraging, but you can win if you don't give up, right? Another is that there are exceptions to everything I'm telling you. Everything I have just told you, there are editors out there who are going to say that's totally wrong, right? So that's just, everybody has their own preferences, their own loves and hates. So the best thing to do is really to look at the specific guidelines of the publication you're pitching. You can often find those in either like the about or the contact page on a publication's website. If you dig around a little bit, it'll sometimes say like, send full pitches to this email, or don't ever send us pitches, only send us submissions, or send this to this person and this to this person, whatever it is, and just follow their guidelines, right? That's relatively simple. Again, the bigger publications often don't. I think they do it just to kind of make it so you have to work for it a little bit, because otherwise they would just get thousands and thousands of pitches. But you can still find those, right? Like even the New York Times Modern Love, which is like a personal essay holy grail, that they've rejected me like 6 times, right? But I'm going to keep trying and eventually we'll get one. But they have a guide published specifically for submitting to Modern Love, right? So even though the New York Times in general doesn't, they're very gatekeepy. Certain columns have guides. So if I want to write for the Letters of Recommendation series or Modern Love or the Well section or whatever, like get specific and look for the guidelines for that. And then I think the single most important thing, which I have saved for last, so it'll be fresh in your brain because I know this is a big information dump, is the difference between a topic and an angle. So when you're pitching, you cannot say, I want to write about Donald Trump's tweets, right? Or whatever it is. You can't just say, like, this is the topic that I want to write about. You really have to have a specific angle and make it very clear immediately what about the thing. Just imagine the editor in your brain when you write your pitch, just imagine that they're saying, what about it, over and over again to you, and pushing you to get more and more specific. What you want to say, I want to argue that X thing impacts this community in Y way, and here's my evidence to support that. I want to argue. So even in reported pieces, you're demonstrating something specific, and you can almost think of it like an argument, even if it's not in op-eds. I want to argue why we should be paying more attention to this thing, why the impact of this matters. Why does it matter? What are you trying to say about it? Specific as possible. I think that's the most important thing. That's like one of the most common reasons I think that pitches get rejected is that they're not specific enough. They're just kind of a general, like, this topic is interesting or this person is interesting. Even with profiles, right? You can't say, like, I want to write a profile of X person, right? You have to explain, like, I want to write a profile of this person because their music and their public persona really exemplifies this element of the current ethos in their field. Right? And then you have to be able to demonstrate why that's true. So always be thinking of like, not just what your idea is, but in describing your idea, convincing the editor why they would be crazy to pass up this idea because you were just onto something so important and so interesting and so new that their audience is going to be clamoring for it, right? I think that says 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes left? Okay, so that's about as long as I wanted to leave for questions. I know I just rattled a ton of stuff at you, but that's kind of covering basic ground, and then we can open it up to whoever has questions. Thanks. Take a sip of water. And I think everybody knows you're supposed to come up to the mic, right, with questions.
You mentioned a little bit, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm Naomi. You mentioned a little bit about discussing ownership of your work when you pitch these publications. Do you have like a specific form that you use, or you just put it in the pitch when you send the information over, or is it after they've said, okay, we'll do your work, let's discuss a plan then?
Yeah, so the contract usually comes from the publication,
Okay.
and they'll have a specific contract that they send, but you should still read it, and there are, you can usually push back a little bit. They're usually going to send you the one that's the most favorable for them, and then you can usually argue. If you see work for hire, which I think you're probably familiar with, I think that's pretty standard in copywriting, right? Or work for hire, where you're being hired to write the thing and then the publication owns that thing forever. I always push back against that because I'm like, I might want to use this later. I might want to write an essay collection, whatever. I want to own all of my own work. So whenever I see work for hire, I say, is there any way to change the work for hire to an exclusivity period? And there's room to negotiate. You just have to learn a couple of those key terms. But the biggest thing is to ask for more money.
Okay.
Always ask for more money. Yeah.
Hi there. So my question is about when you pitch to publications that you already wrote for, do you word the pitch differently than, say, like a new publication you were pitching to, or is it kind of similar?
Yeah, I do kind of just a little like when you're meeting someone who you've met before and you want to save them the embarrassment of saying nice to meet you, right? You'll just say like, oh, good to see you again. Haven't seen you since Paul's Christmas party, right? And then they know who you are. I do that, when I'm sending a first pitch, I say like, I so enjoyed working with you on this piece, and link to it. Say, I would love to work for you again. I'm writing with this new idea. Da, da, da. And once you've written for them a bunch, then they'll probably remember you. But if it's like you wrote one thing for them a year ago and haven't talked to them since then yeah, slip in a little reminder so they know who you are.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Jamila.
Hi.
Hi. I had a question about research. So when you have an idea for something, how do you go about the initial information gathering, and what questions do you ask yourself to spark more, to spark something like, okay, I think I need more research on this. Does that make sense?
You mean like with an op-ed piece, or more like a big reported piece?
I guess a bigger piece, or really anything that you would want more information on. I think I was talking about this with a couple of the writers that, when you get into blogging, it could turn into a lot of quoting something that someone else quoted, quoting the quote of a quote,
Right. Yeah.
And so how do you go and find, I want to say, accurate information, or just information more in depth? How do you get a feel for, I guess, the people you're writing about, and more history on the topic?
A good thing to do, one of my favorite ways to find like a new way into a topic that's been written about a lot, is to read what's out there, and usually there'll be a couple experts that pop up here and there, and they're just like quoted once in passing, because it's like, this is the expert on this, we have to get them to weigh in. And if they've like given a comment here and there, and then I'll reach out to that person and try and get a longer interview with them and get like the rest of their perspective. And then it's just kind of like the other publications are leading me to them, but I'm not like replicating their research, right? If somebody else has already done a big thing where this person is their main expert, it's less interesting for me to interview them because their opinion's already out there, right? But if somebody seems important in the field, but they're only quoted in passing, then getting a longer sit down with them can be really fruitful. Also just like reading a lot, when I'm starting to work on a big piece, I just read as many things as I can that are out there, just to get a sense of like, again, the conversation, what's been said, what's missing, what the disagreements are. You'll start to get a sense of like, these people are kind of arguing from this side and these people are kind of arguing from this side, and just familiarizing yourself with the territory of the subject.
When you're writing on the topic, you just read everything in general on the topic.
Yeah, and I take notes, and I start to like compile a big document, and once I have like, you start to organize them into sections of like, this is the history, this is the argument, these are like the main players, and then always be thinking about like, why does this matter? Who does this impact? I think is the biggest thing. Like, who is this going to directly affect? And see if you can talk to those people.
Okay, sweet. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, I'm Catherine.
Hi.
And my question is, so I've been working for the HOTH for a couple years, and before that I did a lot of creative freelance work and a lot of reportage and personal essays, but because I've been doing this full time, I have some major gaps almost in my resume. So I know that'll work against me to a certain extent. How can I get back, not necessarily in the habit of pitching, but if I use those old clips?
I think it's fine.
Okay.
I don't think it really matters. And I mean, if they're like 20 years old, you know, which I don't think you look old enough for them to be that old, you know, once in a while, if it's like all my clips are only like scanned from print because I was freelancing before there was the internet, you know, then like,
exactly.
you know, I mean, then that happens. And I won't hold that against the person, but in that case, maybe it'd be useful to say like, you know, I've been doing this other work recently. I'm trying to get back into freelancing. But I mean, I use clips that are 5 years old if they're like the best example I have of the kind of writing I'm pitching. And I think that's fine. You don't
Okay.
need to worry about it.
And one more quick question. At what point is it appropriate to ask for a kill fee? And how should that email be articulated?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, a kill fee, sometimes if you've already written the piece or you've already done like the bulk of the reporting and then the publication decides not to run it, sometimes they'll still give you partial fee. It's called the kill fee. It's usually like 20 or 25%. And that really depends, it really depends on who decides to kill the piece and why. If you've done everything that's been asked of you, you've delivered good work on time, and they decide to kill it for some internal reason that has nothing to do with you, it's perfectly appropriate when they say, I'm so sorry, we're not going to be able to run this piece, to say, totally understand, are you able to do a kill fee? And, but if it's like, you've been late, you're not delivering what they're asking, if it's kind of on you, or, sometimes I've had people write personal essays for me, and like I've worked with them on 3 rounds of edits, and then they decide like, oh, this is really personal, I actually don't want it out there. I'm not gonna like push them, that's a reasonable thing, like if you're not comfortable, fine, but I'm not gonna pay you,
Yeah.
right? Like that, if it's your call, you don't get a kill fee, basically.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
I guess
Hi.
you kind of answered it with the kill fee, but like, say either you have a really good pitch or you did finish something. What do you end up doing with it if you decide that it's not going to be published? Like, is it something that you'd put on a blog, or maybe you might try to just sit on it for a while and maybe swing back around?
Or sell it somewhere else right away. You don't tell them that another publication just killed it. Just say like, hey, I have this piece.
Okay.
Do you want it? And just pitch it like you would any other normal piece.
Okay, so
If a publication doesn't run it, then they don't own it, unless it's work for hire, which is another good reason to get exclusivity period instead, because then it's about they're buying the right to publish it from you. They're not buying the actual work. So if you have that kind of contract and they don't end up running it, it reverts to you and you own it and you can do whatever you want with it as if they had never existed.
Okay, so like the general idea is like, it's a product at that point, and you're gonna try to sell it no matter what, right?
Yeah.
So you're not gonna like just put on Medium or something, or
I mean, Medium is great. There are cases where like you just want to get it out there, especially if you have something that's really time sensitive and you're not able to sell it, and it's like, if I don't publish this tomorrow, it's not gonna be relevant anymore. Then sure, put it up on a blog, put it on Medium. But if it's something that's gonna be relevant forever, then
Yep.
just stick with it until you find somebody who's gonna pay you.
cool.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Lauren. I also have 2 quick questions. Question 1, how do you balance your time between pitching and finding new work, and then writing the stories that have been accepted? Like, what does that kind of time management look like between the 2? And then the second question is, how do you manage your time on social media? Because I also joined Twitter to kind of connect with the writing community and keep up with conversations, but it can also be just a soul-sucking website. And so then I step away from Twitter because I can't do it anymore, but then I miss the developments that have happened, or the rest of the conversation, or an editor posted like, send me this pitch or whatever, but by the time I've seen it, it's been 3 days and like 3,000 people sent them a pitch because I couldn't be on Twitter, just for my own mental health. So how do you balance that?
I have bad and unhealthy answers to both of those questions, but I'm going to give you my answers anyway. First, as for like balancing pitching new work and actually executing the work that you've already been assigned, I kind of have accepted that like there's never going to be the perfect flow. You know, I tried for years to be like, if I can just get into this perfect rhythm, then I'll be like a shark and just constantly swimming at this perfect speed and always, you know, and it'll be great. And it just doesn't work because there are too many variables that you can't control, right? Like, you can be pitching for months and not getting anything, and you're getting more and more desperate, so you're just sending out more and more ideas, and then you get 6 assignments all at once, and they all want them back next week. And, you know, I kind of have accepted the rhythm is not going to be this like constant even flow. It's going to be a kind of feast and famine flow, and just like accept that sometimes I'm going to be really busy and just do it all. But then when I'm in that really busy phase, don't forget to also be pitching, so that the really busy isn't immediately followed by completely dry and desperate and afraid I'm going to be broke, right? And just kind of, you just have to try your best to like pitch continuously, and you'll get a sense for like how often you're getting pieces accepted and how fast you can work and how many things you can juggle at once. And there's no perfect answer. And then as for Twitter, I never close it on my browser, so I wouldn't know what to say about healthy social media breaks. I don't take them. You probably should. If you're feeling like you need to, then do. And I think just accept that like you're gonna miss things sometimes. You know, I mean, I check Twitter like every 20 minutes for all of the time that I'm awake, and I still miss things. So you're gonna miss things sometimes, and it's fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi.
I was wondering, as far as your opinion pieces, other than your credibility now as a writer, research, how do you strike the balance of like, my opinion is important and it's just like someone rambling? Like, you know, like what makes a publisher care about your opinion about a topic?
I think that's a good question, and I think that's something that people worry about a lot when they're starting to pitch things. And I think the thing to remember is that it's not about your opinion. They don't care because like we need to know what April has to say about it, right? It's more about the argument.
Okay.
So if you can make a good case, you know, think of it almost more like it's more about the conversation, and it's more about the idea and the argument that you're making. And if you can point out flaws in the way something is being looked at, and you can provide the evidence to make that case, it's not about your credibility as an individual, it's about the credibility of your argument. So you don't have to have credentials to make a good argument for something.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Patrick Boblin. So I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
So this is maybe a little more existential, but I write.
Awesome. Okay.
That's all of my questions this weekend. I write a fair amount of political op-eds, and one of the things that's happened to me only a couple of times, and it hasn't been too severe, but I've been halfway through and I've found more research that maybe counteracts the argument I began with, counteracts the pitch. Maybe I don't change the argument, like the argument still has a tautology, but like I've like changed my mind and maybe I feel odd about continuing it. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, or like you come into conflict once you see the facts, but do you still do it anyway? Because I've needed the money, so I still do it, and I don't know.
Yeah, there are two approaches to that. If you realize halfway through that you're just wrong, and like you really just don't believe this thing anymore, then it's totally fine to write back to your editor and say, hey, I've looked into this a little more, and I realize actually this thing is more true. And you present them with a new approach to the topic. And don't just say, like, never mind and disappear, because if they've given you the assignment, they've probably slotted it into publication they want it to run. But just offer them an alternative. Explain, like, this piece of evidence changed my mind. I realize now that new idea, right? And see if they'll let you change your argument, right? If it's not that you totally change your mind completely and you realize you're wrong, and it's just like, oh, this is more complicated than I thought it was, and the other side has some good points too, then include that. You actually have more credibility if you make your case and then you say, like, some people, so-and-so people argue da-da-da instead, and like include the other side of it in your piece, and then either like, argue against it in your piece. So show that it's there and explain why you still believe your original premise, but, this evidence offers something to think about, and you can leave it on a kind of like thoughtful, like, we'll see kind of note.
So don't abandon it.
No, never abandon it.
Okay, thanks.
How important do you feel it is for writers to have a niche?
I mean, it can be really helpful, you know, when you're just looking for new ideas. If you can be really familiar with that one area, it just helps you find ideas because you're connected, you're plugged into it, you know what all the conversations are. It can also help you get assignments from editors because you demonstrate that you're like kind of an expert on that. So it can be great, but don't feel like you're going to be lost and out of work if you don't find a niche. You know, I write about books and weird science stuff and sex and feminism and politics and grief and art. You know, I mean, I have 6 niches, so I have none, right?
Yeah.
But and that works too. You know, you can have multiple areas of interest, or you can have one that you really throw yourself into, but don't fake it. You know, if you don't actually really want to spend all your time writing about this one thing, don't feel like you have to force it.